Okay. So I'm thrilled that we are joined today by these amazing panelists who were so generous with their time and efforts in helping us come up with a good conversation to launch us rather than anything overly formal. We really wanted this to be a discussion. Rebecca Smith Aldrich, excuse me, is the executive director for the Mid-Hudson Library System, co-founder of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, and principal author of the new National Climate Action Strategy for Libraries. Among many other great accomplishments, Rebecca is the co-founder and current president of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, an international project to help create leadership in the profession to co-create libraries and communities that will thrive in the coming years. Beth Villar-Williams is the Associate Professor and User Experience Research Librarian at the Oregon State University Libraries. She has worked in almost every library type in various geographic locations and always as a consistent sustainability advocate and educator. Beth is also a co-founder of the ALA Sustainability Roundtable, and she is at Oregon State University Libraries and Press, where she was recently the co-chair of the Faculty Senate Carbon Commitment Committee and co-wrote the grant to get a solar roof on the library. Corey Fahrenkopf is the staff librarian at Eastham Library in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. He is one of the organizers for the Blue Marble Librarians, as well as the Crew Climate Hub advisor. His debut novel, Living in Cemeteries, was published this past April. Congratulations, Corey. And he has published around 100 short stories, many of which are ecological horror, fantasy, sci-fi in venues such as Electric Literature, the Southwest Review, the Florida Review, Catapult, the Deadlands, Nightmare Magazine, and elsewhere. Jennifer Waxman is an archivist and head of collection management at Tulane University Library. She is a founding member and co-chair of the New Orleans Preservation Coalition and the Alliance for Response, and she is currently on their steering committee, serving as the emergency and city liaison. Jennifer also served on the curriculum committee for this project and is going to be kind of leading us through today's session. So with that, I'm going to turn over the remainder of the session to Jennifer, who will be guiding us through these grounding definitions and then engaging our panelists in conversation. Thank you so much again for being here. Jennifer, you can take it away.
Thank you, Amanda. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's roundtable. I'd like to thank IMLS for funding this worthwhile series, and to Amanda, our project director and fearless leader, also to Justin Wadlin and Lisa Spiro and the DLF Climate Justice Working Group members who wrote this grant. Today, I'm going to start with an overview of the term resilience from a multidisciplinary perspective. This talk is linear as it tracks the definition and application of the term through various domains over the last 50 years. This term is used over and over in many different contexts. You may be sick of hearing it. And because of its ubiquity, it may seem that being resilient is simply another way to reinforce a Western hegemonic view of progress and accumulation of power and wealth for those that already have it. That's not what this is. I will not cheerlead you into returning to the status quo. Congruently, the concept has deep layers and associations to the personal and the familial. And on a personal level, we're all here today because we have allowed ourselves to take the time to see, to hear, to feel, and to be intentional in our approach and actions within our communities, inside and outside of work, that support the resiliency of a plausible and just future. Next slide, please. The types of resilience we're going to talk about today are ecological, social ecological, engineering, disaster, community, indigenous, and climate. There are a couple of other ones out there, such as psychological and economic, but we don't have time to explore that today. Next slide, please. We, of course, will begin with the dictionary definition from the OED. The literal meaning of resilience is inelasticity, or the power of resuming an original shape or position after compression, like a spring or a rubber band. And your figurative definition is the quality or fact of being able to recover quickly or easily, or resist being affected by a misfortune, shock, or illness. Next slide, please. So let's look at our abilities and attributes, which we will be accumulating throughout this brief talk about resilience. So we have a rebound and a quick recovery, and being able to resume original shape or resist change altogether. Okay, next slide, please. Now, let's look at ecological resilience, because that's really the beginning of the study of resilience as a part of a system or systems. Ecological resilience is defined as a capacity to absorb disturbance and remain fundamentally unchanged or maintain the same relationships and essential structures in the face of instability and change. The concept was defined by C.S. Halling in a much-cited essay in 1973, where he explains, among other things, how fish, insects, and trees persist, albeit exist, in, quote, a system profoundly affected by changes external to it and continually confronted by the unexpected. He makes clear that ecosystems are complex layers of interconnectedness, and non-human life forms in them are adapting and transforming to ever-changing circumstances with a diverse set of coping mechanisms. Next slide, please. So back to our abilities and attributes. We have, again, rebounding and recovering quickly, and we resume our original shape or resist change, but that's not exactly what we're going for. So we'll strike that and instead add, thanks to C.S. Halling, the ability to maintain essential functions and relationships, which is a nod to the interconnectedness of everything. We have the ability to accept uncertainty because change is real. And we also now have a diverse set of coping mechanisms and the ability to adapt and transform, which helps us survive in a new set of post-disturbance conditions. Next slide, please. Now, fast forwarding to the 1990s, where Halling and like-minded scientists have been studying resilience in a complex coupled human ecological and economic system, or systems. They present a new concept called social ecological resilience in a much cited opinion piece about sustainable development and natural disasters in coastal communities, published in Science magazine in 2005, only a couple of weeks before Hurricane Katrina. In this article, Neil Adger and colleagues define the term as the capacity of linked social ecological systems to absorb recurrent disturbances so as to retain essential structures, processes, and feedbacks, and to the degree a system is capable of self-organization, and to the degree to which the system can build capacity for learning and adaptation. They argue that much like ecosystems, governance and social systems can incorporate a diverse set of coping mechanisms, and humans can learn from unexpected shock by adapting and transforming. So this is a big jump from where we started, but it is fundamental to understanding climate resiliency today, which is why I'm focusing on it now. The authors direct their arguments at governments and NGOs, particularly the disaster and emergency management sector. They make it clear that erosion of resilience inherent in coastal ecosystems from misguided use of natural resources under the dominant paradigm of controlling nature and maximizing yield, and that the loss of livelihoods and local knowledge of coastal populations and cultural assets will further the potential for widespread human catastrophe without a shift in perspective. Next slide, please. So a very important thing that the authors identified, which is a recurring theme for us here today, is the acknowledgement of the interconnectedness of things and the need to shift towards that perspective. To face this reality and build resilience, the authors write that it will require a multidisciplinary cross-sector cooperation and alliances to enhance the adaptive capacity to deal with disturbance and to build preparedness for living with change and uncertainty. So this implies the profound shift away from top-down government intervention in natural resource management and disaster recovery, shifting towards a collaborative model with a focus on adaptation from within communities. They conclude the article by saying there is no time to waste. Next slide, please. Other direction. Yes, one more. Thank you. Okay. Oh, back one, please. Thank you. Okay, let's review our abilities and attributes. We have the same things that we began with: rebounding and quick recovery. Now we maintain our essential functions and relationships. Again, the interconnectedness of everything. We have the ability to accept that change is real. We have a diverse set of coping mechanisms, and we have the ability to adapt and transform. But now we also have self-organization. And this is real agency here. And this is what we're getting to at the core of the meaning of resilience in the face of climate change and climate justice. One more, next slide, please. So I guess you're now feeling like you have to be a superhero, but don't worry about that because you're not doing this alone, I promise. Next slide, please. Well, it looks like we missed a slide back, a few slides back about engineering resilience, but that we can talk about this really quick. The one important thing about engineering resilience is that it adds us an ability for us to mitigate risk. So you see there that the definition of engineering resilience is the ability of a system to reduce the chances of a shock, to absorb such a shock if it occurs, and then to recover quickly after a shock and reestablish normal performance. And what's really important here, and the timing of this, the speed, the quick recovery of this definition is different from ecological time, let's say, in recovery, or human, and it's more closely related to disaster, human disaster time. And that's important because, let's say, like hospital returning to normal operations after an earthquake should be fairly quick. So again, we have in this definition now the ability to mitigate risk. All right, next slide, I think, and one more, please. Okay, now this brings us back to a very important conversation going on at the same time as this within the sustainable development and globalization conversation. We have disaster risk reduction and hazard mitigation, and it's an often parallel conversation, intersecting one going on with the sustainable development and global development of the late 20th and 21st century. By 2012, after a string of disasters costing billions in damage and recovery in the US, the National Research Council published a landmark report called Disaster Resilience and National Imperative. And this report defines resiliency very succinctly. It is the ability to prepare and plan for, absorb, recover from, and more successfully adapt to adverse events. So this seems to sum up the previous 4 decades of the application of this term across the disciplines that we just discussed, but without that speedy recovery. And this report acknowledges that resilience must be born from within the whole community, and it requires continuous assessment and planning and refinement by communities and all levels of government. Resilience is not a task that can be marked complete. There's also an understanding that underserved and underrepresented populations often face higher risks from impacts of disaster, including climate change, and that the inequities are exacerbated when not addressed as part of the planning and mitigation phase. This report was written by what Adger and his colleagues in 2005 called for, a cross-discipline, cross-sector group made up of experts in the physical sciences, engineering, public health, social behavior sciences, NGOs, the private sector, economics, and the emergency management sector. Now, I want to acknowledge real quick that I have flattened the financial component of disasters, recovery, and risk reduction, because that would require a whole nother talk, possibly a whole nother workshop series. I just wanted to acknowledge that who pays and why is a very real concern, but by centering equity and justice, it has become a part of the conversation around resilience, preparedness, and recovery on a local, state, and national level. Next slide, please. So some of this mitigating risk and disaster resilience might be familiar to you. You may have contributed to the continuity of operations planning or created a disaster plan for your organization. You may already be familiar with the 4 phases of emergency management cycle, which you see on the middle of the slide here. But on a more personal level, everyone is now familiar with disaster response and mitigation of risk as you experience the global COVID-19 pandemic. You now know what PPE, or personal protective equipment, is, such as a face mask, and how to use it effectively. And you understand how social distancing mitigated the risk of contracting the virus. As information science professionals and cultural collection stewards, we are lucky to have a body of science-based knowledge about mitigation and risk reduction to our collections in the field, thanks to our preservation and conservation colleagues. Initiatives like the Alliance for Response, the National Heritage Responders, and the publication of COSTEP. They put building networks and relationships with local community partners at the center of their disaster response strategies. Partnerships, relationships, the interconnectedness of everything. Now we see this is key to building resilience. Next slide, please. And our panelists today have contributed a lot to this conversation and amplified the message about sustainable practices and preparedness in our field. In fact, one of them wrote a book dedicated exactly to this topic, resilience. They have produced trainings and incredible resources, built grassroots networks and movements, incorporated action towards sustainability and climate resilience in the GLAM sector. And in a few minutes, we'll hear from each of them, not just about mitigation, but also about adaptation and transformation. Their work encompasses the next definition we will discuss, community resilience. Next slide, please. So community resilience takes us beyond the hazard and mitigation emergency sector. The big question is, how do you achieve resilience? How do you measure it? What indicates that it has been achieved? The full definition is the capacity to anticipate risk, limit impact, bounce back rapidly through survival, adaptation, evolution, and growth in the face of turbulent change. Studies in earnest began in 2012 by the Community and Regional Resilience Institute, or CARI, who is tasked by FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security to look at implementation using a cross-disciplinary, cross-sector approach. They determine that resilience is an inherent and dynamic attribute within each community, and there is an adaptive ability to lead to positive outcomes. Success requires centering local knowledge as primary knowledge and the trust that communities need to be self-determinant. Resilience cannot be top-down, it must come from within. With this definition of community resilience, we also see transformation as evolution and growth, leading to a positive outcome. Next slide, please. So now you must really feel like you have to be a superhero to do all of this work. I promise you don't, because it is, again, a collaborative effort and a shared responsibility. Next slide, please. Okay, so back to our abilities and attributes, which we've accumulated a lot of them at this point. We all know that we have to rebound. We have this quick recovery, but it is now established that resilience is an inherent characteristic that originates naturally in human societies, much like ecosystems. And now we have a much more agency in the ability to plan and mitigate risk while also ensuring that change and transformation is community driven. Next slide, please. And of course, this talk would not be complete without understanding that resilience is fundamentally a part of the indigenous ways of knowing and traditional ecological knowledge. Resilience in nature is maintained through indigenous practice, meaning it is not destroyed by controlling nature or over extraction. Human beings are a part of nature, not a part from it. This also forces the question about what we are aiming for in our post-industrial climate changed age, where we have not had the chance to face limitations to our growth, or to ask ourselves if progress is only about continual profiting and endless expansion. Indigenous knowledge challenges these dominant paradigms and allows for a true acknowledgement of the interconnectedness of things. Next slide, please. And finally, we are at why we are here today, to talk about our role in libraries, archives, and museums, and galleries in building climate resilience. It is defined as by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as the capacity of interconnected social, economic, and ecological systems to cope with a hazardous event, trend, or disturbance, responding or reorganizing in ways that maintain their essential function, identity, and structure. Resilience is a positive attribute when it maintains capacity for adaptation, learning, and/or transformation. So you can see how ecological definition is part of this, the engineering definition is a part of this, and again, and community resilience is a big part of this as well. Now, equality and justice are critical aspects of building climate resilience, and the University of California Center for Climate Justice acknowledges the disproportionate impact of climate change on poor and low-income communities, the least responsible for the problem. It identified 6 pillars to climate justice. Of the 6, one is community resilience and adaptation, and another is indigenous climate action. Next slide, please. Equity has also become central to this conversation, and you can't see this very well in this slide, but every one of these slides has the word equity. Every one of these screenshots, in this slide has the word equity in it, in its title, in its chapter heading, in the center of that graphic. It appears in major publications and reports, including the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit and the 5th National Climate Assessment, aligning it with ideas of equality, fairness, and justice in the sense of who participates and who controls the process and decision-making. That does not mean that equity has been achieved in all of these sectors, but it is critical and essential to our work, and it has been included. Next slide, please. And finally, the U.S. Climate Toolkit and its steps to resilience were created for climate practitioners who bring together a diverse cross-sector, multidisciplinary team to create climate actions and plans that benefit the whole community. And you can see on this slide how climate practitioners come from different backgrounds: academia, nonprofit and the private sector, state, local, and tribal governments, the federal government, and these skills and backgrounds that are in the center of that graphic here: planning, facilitation, spatial analysis, data science or system science, engineering, management, project management, community engagement, and hazard mitigation. Now, from these skills, we are going to open up this conversation to our panelists to talk about how they approach resiliency, the frameworks they use, the skills they rely on, and other resources that they are close to. Thank you for listening to this brief-ish overview of resiliency. I hope it inspires and brings you into the fold instead of makes you not want to be a part of that resilience, that rally call that we all feel is overused and not effective. All right. Hi, panelists. How's everyone doing today? The first question I have for everybody is, what issues related to climate change motivated you to become more engaged with this field as a part of your work? I will leave it open for you to each one of you can respond as you feel.
Jennifer, I'll jump in there. That awkward silence, I can't take it. So I'll just share that I certainly had a personal, passionate interest. And, just like many of the folks that you see here on this panel and in the audience as well, we're not dummies. We understand what's going on. And so subscribing to that idea from Project Drawdown that every job is a climate job really struck me. How can I use my sphere of influence in my situation? I am part of a consortium of 66 public libraries. That's where I started this work, to think about how do we leverage our roles in our communities to do good work on this topic and find others who want to do this work, because the scale and scope of what we have to deal with requires all of us to pitch in and think about this and figure out how to move forward. And it's brought so much energy to the work we do to understand we're working on something so important that brings people together and really makes libraries relevant and responsive in today's world. It's just been personally fulfilling, professionally fulfilling, and it sustains me. And I know it's a question we're going to talk about later, to do the work and to keep doing it, even though we know it's really difficult because of all the intersections you just enumerated for us, Jennifer. It's a really complex issue that people feel very overwhelmed by, and that can result in paralysis with nothing happening, which is what we saw in this country for literally decades. So we need to find ways to create entry points for the work, to make it bite-sized and doable for people. And in my world, public libraries are the perfect catalyst for that in every community across the country. So we really embrace that, and we're trying to make the most of it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Definitely public libraries, community-centric, a great place to start. Beth or Corey?
I'm going to jump back a little bit or speak a little bit more personal, because I would say there's never really been one issue for me, probably similar to everyone here, a lot of the panelists as well, like Rebecca alluded to, nothing that specifically motivated me. This has kind of been a driving force my entire life. I call it a moral imperative to me, and ever since I was a kid, maybe it was from being born the year of the first Earth Day in 1972 or something. My parents just always instilled in me the love of nature, being outside, growing your own food, just kind of connecting with that and the science and related to it, citizen science and all of that. But then as I kind of was growing up, I really realized, like Rebecca alluded to, how deeply embedded and how huge this issue was, seeing the rise of global temperatures decades ago, seeing the great greenhouse gas emissions rise, this huge carbon issue we face, and the lack of renewable energy. I mean, at least when I was way younger, the complexity, the politics. I can remember when Reagan took the solar panels off the White House, and that impacted me as a kid. Oh, so we're not even thinking about the future in this way. So seeing how quickly and urgent this issue is growing and growing and growing, but people are so slow to act. And it's hard, like Rebecca alluded to, the paralysis, where do I go? So I think for me, I kept thinking, well, how can I make change? And I'm not going to be a scientist is going to make some huge discovery. That's not me. I'm not even a really a leader or writer. I'm not like Rebecca. I'm not going to produce a bunch of books or other work that people do, but I'm kind of what better way can I do it? And just the day-to-day, the little things. So I think my motivation kind of back in the day was just, I literally was the person a couple decades ago that was pulling the recycling out of the trash can at the workshop and having people laugh at me. And I did it anyway, but there's always someone that comes forward. There was always someone that was huh, let me go help you. Yeah, this is a little thing, but it's like modeling it. So I would say like modeling that behavior and sharing those ideas. I started blogging because I was getting ideas from people. So getting that out there, that was motivating. But like today, I would say, you know, I've worked in a lot of libraries, done a lot of different things. But I'm at a place now and I'm at a college campus, so speaking for the universities, as much as I firmly believe public libraries are an amazing center, community center for resilience, you can do this in academic campuses too. I'm lucky that I'm at a good place at Oregon State where they're really taking seriously climate change and doing great science work. But it doesn't mean we're doing things around campus day in and day out. There's people who are still in their silos and things. So for me, I get motivated at where are we now, where I am, and what can I do to make change. So like mentioned at the beginning, I was co-chair of the Faculty Senate's Carbon Commitment Committee, which was a push for me to do that work, but it made me connect and engage with campus leaders, and I can hear, or not leaders, faculty. And as the rise of AI and supercomputing this last year, I was like, okay, I need to find out more about the carbon input and the data center impact of this. So I did put it, speaking of every job's a climate job, I put in a one-page paper on every job's a climate job and got picked to talk to the AI leaders on campus about this, just talking about how the impact of AI and carbon. So I think for me, it's like shifted over the years, but it's just always been a moral imperative for me, and finding that motivating factor wherever I am just kind of keeps me going in the library and in the profession.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Beth. Corey, go for it.
Yeah, so for me, I live on Cape Cod, and if you don't know where Cape Cod is, it's that little peninsula that sticks off of Massachusetts like an arm. So it's very small. It's surrounded by the ocean. And probably since I was in high school, everyone always talks about like, when is Cape Cod getting swallowed by the ocean? And every year, more and more studies come out that make it sound like it's sooner and sooner, which doesn't feel great because, like, as we know, like we're talking about adaptations and stuff for this program. I can adapt to a lot of stuff. I cannot adapt to breathe underwater. So I would like to do whatever I can to like ideally educate people on this topic, to get people to think about how they affect the environment, they affect the place they are, and ideally try to preserve what's going on. So working in the libraries, doing programming through that, that's been one of the things that's like made me not feel like I'm like, what's the word I want to say, like whittling away time, not like making an effort in any way, shape, or form. So that's one of the big things. The other thing is like I write a lot of like eco horror and like eco dark fantasy, and that's kind of one of the things I've spent a lot of time reading on and educating myself on. So between those two things, that's how I've come to be involved in the sphere and come to do the work.
Excellent. Thank you all for sharing your background in that and what motivates you. In the last slide that I was showing you there, the U.S. Climate Service Resiliency Toolkit lists these skills for climate practitioners. They list the following: planning, facilitation, spatial analysis, data science, earth science, engineering, management, project management, community engagement, and hazard mitigation. Now, those are some of the skills climate practitioners want to have. And they're looking, of course, at this larger community-wide government, NGO, private sector, like groups to get together. But for you, what are the skills you rely on most? And if any of those come into play, I'm guessing community engagement is a big one. But what other skills do you rely on to do this kind of work?
All right, I can jump in for this one. Definitely looking down that list of skills, you know, there are some things that jump out. I mean, you have to kind of understand a little bit of Earth system science in order to understand what's happening, I think, but everyone can learn the basics. I mean, you can learn it in elementary school. So that's something that I think we all should kind of learn the basics of. But definitely, for me, it's very community based. Wherever community, public, academic, whatever community your community is really key. Of course, disaster planning. I'm sure others, Rebecca and others, will share some more on that. I would add in a couple things that I've been learning over the years that are important are storytelling. I used to do facts. This is what people need to know. And over the years, I learned people don't know facts, especially in this day and age of fake news and everything's fake news. So telling stories really impacts people. So I think that is a really big thing that we all need to learn how to do better. But I also feel like the inner development goals, hopefully a link will come out in my chat in a minute, is a framework that I've been using lately to help, or something that I've been trying to present a little more to libraries to learn. And if you haven't heard about the inner development goals, check it out. It's about, in order to get into sustainable development goals, SDGs and things like that, I think we need to take care of ourselves first, which is understanding your being, you're relating to yourself, the cognitive skills, but the caring for the world and others through relating and collaborating in order to act. So I really think a lot of what we're talking about here with resiliency comes into play with this. So inner development goals, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
I would say that one of the major things that I really look for is networking, right? So on Cape Cod, there's tons of nonprofits. There's also like a bunch of town-wide organizations and committees that are all working, doing this kind of work. And when I first started doing this, I was like super overwhelmed because like climate change and resilience and all this is like such a giant topic. And I was like, oh, I need to come up with unique programs. I need to like do this all on my own. I need to like create this thing for myself when so many other organizations and people were doing this. So over the years, I've learned all about like the different groups that are doing education on native plants, on erosion control, on going green, EV charging stations and stuff of that nature. And so by finding all these people and learning about all the different groups, I can just essentially call on these groups to do programs, figuring out what they're already doing so that I'm not just like overlapping and like kind of taking either some speed away from them or some movement away from them. And it also makes you feel a lot less alone. So as a librarian, it's great to like figure out who's doing what in your community, and where the gaps are in your community, right? So if you notice that you've got committees that are doing recycling, composting, green energy and stuff, but they're missing something on like native plant education, I guess. That's one of the things that I really care about. And you see there's that hole in the big picture, then you can figure that you're the one who needs to fill that hole. The other thing I would talk about is social media literacy, because so many of these organizations that I'm mentioning and referring to, they're very active on there. So you can also see what they're doing. But also, I think it's a good move. So through the Blue Marble Librarians, one of the things that people saw us doing was a lot of social media outreach. Gabrielle Griffiths ran that, and she did a great job with it. And that was a way for a bunch of libraries to see what other libraries are doing. So even though specifically in your town or in your region or whatever, you can see what people are doing. If you see what other libraries are doing, there's a lot of innovative stuff going on. And again, it helps you not reinvent the wheel. So if you're on Instagram or on Facebook, you can follow the other libraries and be like, this is what they're doing. This is what they're doing. Do I have a need for this in my library? Maybe. And then through that, you can also use those social media platforms to reach out to those librarians to be like, hey, what tips do you have for me? So yeah, so I think those are the two I would really look at.
Yeah, I found in the work, and Jennifer, I reviewed that list that you gave us of the skills related to it, and I'll just share a little bit about, we've been very focused at the Sustainable Libraries Initiative of building community within the library profession. We started at the New York Library Association, just a small group of us, 25, who kind of all just came together and said, this is not moving fast enough. Who's in charge? Like, who's setting the pace at the national level and telling libraries, you got to do X, Y, and Z. And suddenly we just looked at each other, we're like, let's do it. Like, we'll figure it out. And the things that were so key to us was a shared vocabulary. What are you actually talking about? What do you actually mean by this? You can't just be going green. We really have to understand the interconnections with the economic choices we've made as a country and a world, and the impacts on folks that, as Jennifer, you described, have had very little to do with the problems we are now contending with, and who are now also being negatively impacted by many of the choices that are being made to mitigate the problems that we are faced with. So that common vocabulary to simplify very complex issues. So you had the triple bottom line definition up on one of your slides there towards the end of your presentation. That was an absolute turning point for our work. After 10 years of trying to do going green workshops in the profession, when we started talking about the triple bottom line, it exploded. And people really understood what we were talking about, that it's not just recycling. We have to understand this wider net of issues that contend with here. But how do you do that without overwhelming people? And that's where Corey tapped into this concept of the community of practice, whether it's in your local community or in your profession, of understanding you're not the only person thinking about this. Let's learn from each other so we can move faster and iterate on good work that's come before us in order to have the speed necessary to address what's going on here, and really respect the whole concept of collective impact, that no one of our institutions is going to be able to turn the tide on what's going on here. We need to partner with each other across disciplines, across industries, and really find the common ground it's going to take to do good work on these topics. And, I am going to get on I know I already am on my soapbox. I'm going to get on the next level of my soapbox and say that there does need to be more focus than we've all been, I think, experiencing over the past 10 years. We finally got enough people paying attention to the issue, but we're off in our own corners doing our own thing. There needs to be intense focus on mitigation, adaptation, and justice, period. Those things intersect. There's overlaps, absolutely. But, each person kind of coming up with their own idea of what to do is very nice, but it's not moving the dial. And we need to move the dial. You are literally talking about people's lives are at stake because of this topic. So when we talk about resilience, and we think about community resilience, we're talking about that because we care about each other. We care about our neighbors. And we have to put those activities that will most protect ourselves, our neighbors, our livelihoods, our ability to thrive and live. As Corey said, we're not going to be able to breathe underwater. So let's figure out, what does it look like to adapt in the face of what is coming, while also trying to help future generations not have to deal with this being quite as bad as it's predicted to be today. So I think that shared vocabulary, respecting community of practice, really participating in collective impact projects, and being way more focused on what are the things that are really going to make a difference to spend your time and energy on. Those are the 4 key things I think really are the skills to develop and to read more about.
I really appreciate all of your answers. Thank you for elevating the soapbox as well, Rebecca. What also was very important to what you said is this element of care and being able to connect with people. All of the theme through all of what y'all have just been talking about is about connection and care. And that is, if you are struggling how to get involved and where to start, just begin from that spot, and that'll lead you in the right direction, I'm pretty sure, to whatever community group you find or whatever activity is already happening or a new idea that you can partner with other people on. Okay, well, so then when you do this work, where in your work do you see the biggest need for action? So obviously, Rebecca, you just sort of touched on this, how to move that dial, really. But for example, is it engaging your upper level management, or you're in the institution you're in, or is it in climate awareness planning? Is it finding time to do this work among your other job responsibilities? So where's the biggest need you see in your work today, or within like the colleagues that you're working with, what they're struggling with, or how to fit that in?
I think, as from your description, right, there's 3 levels of work, and Beth kicked us off talking about ourselves and how we feel about this topic and our ability to embrace our role to do work in this area, and to let go of the idea that this is extra work. Like that, I feel like I have that conversation a lot over the course of the past few years. Like, you're just living your life and doing your job. You can choose to do it with a different lens. You can do it with the lens of, when I make a choice in my job about what to purchase or who to work with, let's just go through a couple of questions in our heads before we make those decisions. I'm not asking you to do extra. I'm asking you to do what you're doing thoughtfully and really just think through the choices that you're making. Okay, if I pick this Post-it note product over this Post-it note product, what's the impact on the environment? Were the workers for this company paid a living wage? What, is this recyclable? How much dye was in this thing, right? Like educating, being a more literate consumer, being a more considerate consumer, perhaps, and just, having a real personal goal, as Beth has really, she's so articulate about talking about that moral imperative. Like, if that's truly at the heart and center of what you do, that's what motivates you, that's what gets you out of bed, make it part of your job. It doesn't have to be an add-on. It's just the way you do your job. So I think that embracing that is the first really key thing to have happen. But then when we talk about within an institution or an organization or the culture that we're working within, I do think it has to be both bottom up and top down, because you got to find the other champions in the organization that want to do the work. And where you find them will be on that continuum of roles that you have in the institution, and just making the most of where people are, working those networks, getting to the right people to get the right things done. You know, I always tell the story of when I got started, before I was the executive director in my organization, I thought it was a great idea to be more sustainable in this organization. And I excitedly walked into the office I'm sitting in now, when I was not the person whose desk this was, pitched my whole idea for this, and he just said no. And I was like, what? What do you mean? We gotta work on this. Like, this is so important. And he just said no. And I was like, oh, well, okay. And I backed out, and I tried to figure out a different way to go about it. And we eventually got there, but I had to understand where he was coming from, what he was dealing with. I had to find other champions in the building who understood what I was saying, and not just me saying it in a really irritated way, but really helping people understand, here are our goals. And I think if we were also taking this into the mix, we would go further with our goals. We were facing fiscal crisis, a morale problem on staff. And when I tied the work to those two things, everyone said yes. And it was top down and bottom up at the same time. And that's why we were so successful in the work.
Yeah, just want to plus one everything Rebecca just said. It was things that I was going to say too. So yeah, very articulate about that. And it does have to be, you know, you really want both top down and bottom. But I really feel like for me, I've been in those, again, I've worked in a lot of different states and a lot of different types of libraries, some more supportive than others. And if you can't get administration on board, like what Rebecca said, rethinking how the narrative, how you're going to bring it forward, how you can get them. I mean, a lot of you are in states where you can't probably even use some of these terms we're using today. So you know how you need to come up with the different way to get people on board. But if you can find what I call those kindred spirits in your organization or wherever you are, like Corey said, you want to have that connection, those people, you want to do it together. Like Jennifer said, you can't do this alone. All of us, I think, are on that same page. Find that right channel. Find that, make an avulsion, if you understand what that word is, when a channel, river jumps its borders or pushes its borders away and finds a new way to go. It's not always like, we can't keep fighting against it, because we're just gonna, you know, hit heads if we're just like getting angry like I used to do all the time. Instead, we have to find another way to kind of get to where we want to go, and find the right people to help you do that kind of work. I think you can get there through that.
So jumping off what Beth was saying, out here in Eastham, like I'm pretty lucky because my director's really on board with this stuff. Our local government's very on board with it. We have lots of town committees that are doing it. And so we run programs on this kind of stuff all the time, but you'll notice that a lot of the same people are showing up. So I think one of the biggest issues that I face as far as like the work goes is like getting new people involved, getting people who aren't on board with these ideas involved. And that kind of goes with like what Beth was saying about how sometimes you have to like phrase things very specifically. Like the work I do with CREW, which is Communities Responding to Extreme Weather. They're based out of Boston. They're a great group that really does a lot to get people prepared for extreme, like out this way, hurricanes, blizzards, just the tornadoes we've been having and stuff, which isn't great. Cape Cod wasn't a place used to have tornadoes. Now it is. But they don't talk about it as climate change. They talk about it as extreme weather. And that way it kind of gets around some of the political like stigma that goes with it. So yeah, so trying to figure out how to get people who aren't already involved. I like trying to think of programs that are tangentially involved or tangentially connected, if that makes sense. Like the one that I'm thinking of mostly right now is, a while ago I did a program like why trees are important for your house and your yard, very general. And through it, I got our friends group gave me a couple $100 to buy seedlings seedlings, saplings, who knows? And we were able to give out a bunch of native trees to people who went to this program. So people were able to come here, learn about why are trees important? We all probably know this. How does it improve your house value? How does it improve your heating and cooling costs? Things of that nature. So we had a lot of people who didn't show up to our other climate programs who would come to this because, one, they get free stuff. People love free stuff. We know that. Like, offer pizza at your programs. If you need to get people there, pizza will bring them. We got a bunch of people in, and they got the free stuff. They got the education from our Barnstable Cooperative Extension. Russ Norton ran that. He's awesome. Probably a lot of you have cooperative extensions wherever you are, or universities around you have these organizations that also will do these kind of programs for you. So reach out to them. But they were able to, one, get a thing they wanted to take away, but B, also get a bunch of information that they might not process in the way of like, this is actually involved in climate change and carbon sequestration. And that might not be a thing that like burrows into their brain, but now it's a thing that's there for them. And I'm not saying like you need to trick people, but like sometimes you kind of need to trick people. So that's what I think.
Yeah, the pizza for climate change. I get it. I thank you all again. This has been just a lot of really great personal experience and information for everybody. I just want to switch real quick now to thinking about digital libraries and essentially our digital services as information science professionals, archivists, librarians, museums. We all manage data. And so where do you see like what services might have to be adjusted or adapted to fit a more climate resilience model? Yeah, it's a big question. How do you see that either playing out at your work or ideas you have that you'd like to see implemented?
I will definitely admit that I bet there's more people on this that are attending that probably have some really great ideas. I know some of them specifically. In spite of working in a lot of different libraries, I haven't really dived into this area as much. But I will call out Sybil, who's on the call now, who's going to be a panelist later this year, who I heard speak about this. And I just thought it was just an amazing little talk about thinking about that digital footprint. And I thought about my own library and I'm like, you're right. We make a copy of a copy and then we make a larger copy and then we make copies of those. And then it just like all the copies of copies for different ways we're sharing it. And then thinking about with my AI work on campus and the data centers we're building here and like, where are we getting the energy from? Like, and then the social justice aspect of where these tend to sit, where the trash electronics go, like all of that. So I think, I remember she had said to us all, if there was a fire, what would you grab and go? And I thought, okay, maybe we need to think not like that's all you're allowed to keep, but like really thinking about from what we talked about earlier, the day-to-day of what you do in your job and can you make slight changes? Well, instead of just like making another copy and printing, like thinking about that before we just move ahead. That was my initial take on that. I also heard about someone doing like GIS students doing like mapping the data centers and where they get their data from. This would be a great student project, and like figuring out the energy uses and where that's coming from. I think that would be really fascinating to learn where you're getting it from and are there changes that you can make to think about that. So that's my initial thought. Thank you, Sybil.
I think it's important for every institution to do a baseline carbon footprint calculation to understand where you are contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. That should include your IT footprint, including cloud storage, which is something we often think, well, it's off-site, it's out of mind. But truly, that is increasingly where libraries and other information institutions' largest impact may be. I was at a conference last May with a guy doing his PhD research on this topic, data centers and their impact on the environment. And he shared this little fact I cannot stop thinking about, which is as we've all been playing with AI and understanding how it works. And he was saying for the AI image generators, basically every time you're generating an image is taking as much electricity as it does a full charge of your smartphone. And it like brought it home for me, like what we are talking about on an exponential level. So as AI is taking off and more people are learning about it, the impact is just growing and growing and growing, yet it's still not as large as our impact of our facilities and our transportation choices and what we do with waste, the waste stream. So understanding the scopes, you can just Google EPA scope 1, 2, and 3 and understand where you have the most impact. I think you have to educate yourself and have awareness, but we also have to understand where to spend the time and energy. So I think that's a growing area of work. I'm glad to hear those folks now speaking about it because I'm certainly not that person. So I love that Beth is running with it too. But I think that we have to be aware of it, but also hold our vendors accountable. So, asking our vendors to be partners with us in this core value of sustainability that we have, we're very heartened to see in my world, public libraries, Overdrive is probably one of the vendors we spend the most money with. They're now a B Corp. So they've taken the time to really think that through and understand their impact. And so knowing that we're dealing with an organization that we are almost forced to deal with, but at least they are trying to do things along the same value set that we have. I think that's another thing for us to consider in the digital collection space, that we are asking our vendors to be partners with us in this work, and to ask them to be accountable as well as we are trying to be accountable with our resources.
So one thing jumping off that, I'm the guy here who does the acquisitions of like ebooks and e-audiobooks. So I think about this a lot. And two things I think that are cool about more e-content for libraries, at least, is like delivery, transportation stuff of books right now it will be lesser and lesser as more of that happens. And also, I don't know if this is so far afield or not, but like all of our hardcovers are wrapped in plastic. We have Mylar covers on everything. So the more digital books, the less Mylar covers we have in our world. But one of the issues I see a lot with collection development as far as Overdrive goes is we know like the prices of ebooks and e-audiobooks is like outrageously high. And so I know there's a lot of different legislation going on trying to at least get that to be like a fair playing field with like publishers and whatnot. So if you can be involved in that in any way, shape, or form so that we can get more affordable audiobooks and ebooks for our libraries, that'd be great. And one of the things that also is an issue is we as libraries always want to meet the demands of like the holds that our patrons have on our books. Like that is like our main thing we're always going for. But in Overdrive, you can't place a hold on a book, or through Libby, you can't place a hold on a book that your library doesn't own yet, right? So sometimes if we're not buying the nonfiction and the climate preparedness manuals or nonfiction text that like might be helpful in this kind of situation, no one can be putting the holds on it. So I think it's important as collection development goes to also identify, again, the holes in our e-collections, and how to fill that with like helpful information that is mainly concrete. Like I'm always about not necessarily as much theoretical information as concrete stuff, because I'm like a public librarian and most of my patrons aren't looking for like academic text on this sort of stuff. They're looking for like on the ground, how do I prepare for hurricanes? Like, what do I do if there's a forest fire? Like Cape Cod, not really forest fires, but that's a big thing. I look at books like How to Prepare for Climate Change by David Pogue, and like how is that important to have available for your patrons. So I think it's always good to try to identify a few e-texts and e-audiobooks that you can have available for them. Because again, like e-texts and through Libby and through Hoopla, those books are always available, right? You don't have to be able to get to the library. When the library's closed, you can still get those books. So yeah, so I know that's a little bit of a different tact for this, but that's my thought on the collection development side of things.
Yeah, thanks for all of your input on this. It does seem like we've been working on some kind of exponential growth path for years. And yes, in conversations with professionals, I mean, within our professional conversations, we talk about curatorial practices, I mean, especially with archivists, and why we're bringing things into the library if, let's say, it's going to take a decade to process it and provide access to it. Like, what is the point of all of that? And let's think more sustainably about our choices. But now with that urgency, that sense of urgency, that this is going to have to be a real conversation once we start thinking about lack of the resources we have to cool our libraries, right? Lack of just the beginning of, well, I'm not going to say the beginning of change. I mean, the beginning of real change, you know? Let's see. Well, we're going to open this up to the audience real soon. We'd encourage you to begin to add your questions to the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. I mean, there's so many things to get to about this. You know, again, people are curious about how to talk to your upper level administration, or how to get, like, you know, executive directors, Rebecca, on board. I mean, you have a lot of executive directors I'm sure you speak to. Is there a specific way you talk about this topic to not instill fear or urgency in a way that makes sense to them to bring them into the fold?
Yeah, you hear in our world in public libraries, we always talk about community-based planning. And as you start to understand the needs of your community, who is the champion for the earth in those conversations? Because even if our community is not, self-identifying the need for clean air and a survivable neighborhood, we know that's under threat. It can look a little different depending on your geography. We're not all on Cape Cod with Corey, unfortunately. Beautiful place. But we all have different threat levels depending on where we live. So as we take responsibility for understanding that if we really want to be authentic institutions that are truly serving our community and being responsive and relevant. And, a big part of my job before I became the director was helping our libraries win their budget votes, win their building votes. And when you think about how do you make the case for taxing yourself more for library services or a new building, it better be responsive to people's needs and things they're experiencing in their real life. And so for library directors, they're very pragmatic. They understand they need to continue to have a good reputation, to have the goodwill of their communities. Sometimes that's just because that's the best way to connect people with the services that our mission is to deliver, but also because of the political and financial realities of having sustainable libraries long term that people will continue to invest in. So here in the Hudson Valley, our libraries, we've trained them to talk about community resilience. When they're talking about facility projects, all facility projects have some aspect of resilience to them, to understand that libraries are the perfect infrastructure for cooling centers, warming centers, air quality refuge, thinking about where you're going to go during an extended power outage. We want that infrastructure to be as resilient as possible, which is drawing new money to our libraries. All of that resonates very well with library directors and sometimes the more difficult audience of their governing boards, which are made up of volunteers in the community who have the ultimate say over library policies, budgets, and plans.
Yeah, Rebecca knows this so well. I'm sorry, I was just going to ping off of her. She knows this so well because she's done a great job with this in public libraries. I was just going to add that I think, yeah, that social infrastructure is so key. So using like the term, I know Rebecca put this in that National Climate Action Strategy, smart libraries, like using some different terms that might be helpful. Creating that social infrastructure where people can come together and get their needs met just helps with building a resilient community. I would say in academic library campuses, what a lot of times where I can get things done is through our students who are our community, and like finding, I talk to the student workers. We have tons of them in our library, or student groups I'm working with around campus. And there's been a recent study by Project Information Literacy. If you haven't seen it, it just came out. They did this big survey on where people get their news about climate change. And they did the general population and they did college students. I mean, college students, they know, they're aware, they're like up here. They're not like saying, no, this isn't true. Like they're ready for action and they're ready to make change. So for me, that's like the people I can get on board to be like, let's cause a little stir. Let's like mix it up a little. Let's cause an avulsion. Let's find a different path. But if you're the leadership, at least in my library, cares about our students, and that's kind of a big reason why we're here. So if we can get them to raise a voice, I kind of wish some of them would start putting protest and tents in front of the library, because I feel like they could literally make change that way. But that hasn't happened yet. But anyway, that is one way that we can get our leadership to listen. So if, for what it's worth, if that's helpful.
And I don't know if I have a whole lot to add to it, but one of the things I would think about is like people can't really argue with statistics. So if you can think of the things that you want to be seeing in your library and look at other libraries that are doing that and see if you can get the statistics from them on how it's working. Specifically like here at Eastham, we basically have like a day shelter. We have like a half building generator. So like when power goes out or something happens, the programming room and like a little tiny bit of the library, like one of the bathrooms and some of the common space is still functional. And we have the local fire and local police departments come in and do a bunch of stuff. So if I was a library that was looking into doing something like that or want something like that, reach out to me here at Eastham or another library that's in your area that's already doing the thing and be like, can you give us some firsthand accounts of like how this was helpful, of how people wanted this, of the amount of people that were using it, the number of people using charging stations during this? And then you'd be like, here is some numbers, and you cannot argue with numbers. So
Jennifer, if I could just jump in here, I'm sorry, I know I already talked on this question, but just to make sure the host and panelists know, I just shared a paper that came out this week from Dr. John Kocher on the really messaging around climate action. And I think it's important to understand when you're trying to build coalitions or speak to folks that you might not be sure how they're feeling about the topic, really understanding what America looks like today when it comes to what they believe when it comes to climate change, because that's an issue for us. I'm actually in a very conservative area of New York State, and people always think of New York as a blue state. We're a very purple area, so we have to be super politically correct when we're talking about things, and make sure we're using language that really works for people. And John has put forth the public health framework for talking about climate action because it more quickly matches up with people's value set. So if someone's able to share that paper I put in the chat, I think that'd be very valuable. It's a good read. It's simple. It's straightforward. It'll click for you very quickly.
Yeah, there's so many resources, and I really appreciate, everyone's perspective here with, public library and academic research library. Something for the cultural heritage world as well, broader picture. What we're all really talking about here is getting a good team together, or finding that network that exists that's cross-disciplinary, cross sector, climate champions, and facilitating work in that respect. And the steps for all of that is to build a team, assess your threats and vulnerabilities, to set the goals, and then to create some plans. I mean, that's the essential that you see in the US Climate Resilience Toolkit and the FAIC Climate Resilience Toolkit for Cultural Heritage. There's all these acronyms right in front of me. Yeah, there's a lot to digest, but ultimately, like you following where your heart, what you care about most, the care you have for the people around you and the environment that you're in, and then you take a few steps, you can get somewhere. I think you can make change and take some action. Yeah. I feel like now might be a good time to ask the panelists if there's anything that they would like to say that we haven't covered through questions or through presentations. I would like to open it up for a free-for-all right now.
I just wanted to, before we get into the Q&A, give a shout out. Corey mentioned the Blue Marble Librarians. What an awesome group that's been doing an excellent job on their blog. Go check it out, subscribe to that. I also invite you to sign up for the newsletter of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative to learn what folks in the Sustainable Libraries Certification Program are doing. We've got 150 libraries, public, academic, and school librarians working on these topics, going first. You can iterate off of the stuff they're doing, be inspired by what they're doing. There's a growing group of people willing to share what they're doing. So I think before we get into the weeds, maybe on some of the other stuff, I just want to say you're not alone. There's amazing people out there doing great work, and connecting with them, I think, will really sustain you.
I'd say one little thing that I also would like to add is a number of years ago when I was first started doing this kind of programming, I did like 5 programs in a row that were all like super heavy, like doom and gloom, like the world is ending kind of programs. And the first program, like a good amount of people attended, and the second one, a little less. And then as these thing went on forward, you notice that it got less and less and less. So I think another thing when we're thinking about meeting our patrons where they're at and meeting our public where they're at, is it's okay to not have every single program be like, here are the insane statistics that are like really dark, like, oh, it's coming for you. It's good to also throw in the more fun stuff if possible. Like I said, like the planting trees programs, the planting seeds, seed swaps and stuff of that nature. So I think if you can either balance the doom and gloom with some like more upbeat kind of stuff, great idea. But also just like if you notice your attendance is dropping from stuff like this, adjust your course, still be doing the same work, still be trying to get the same action calls out there. But statistics aren't always your friends sometimes, counteracting what I said earlier.
Yeah, that's so true, Corey. We did, when I was at North Carolina before this job, we did this like a university and town like a series. films and things, and it was fabulous because it was like a film and discussion. So we would sometimes have a speaker, and we kind of wanted it to be like, what action can we take? But for a while we were just doing all these really like doom and gloom, everything's awful, okay, I'm just going to go home and go to sleep now. But so yeah, we needed some more uplifting ones that were more positive, to see changes were happening, and that gives us inspiration. At least that's definitely what I need. So thinking about like some of this, it is the grief is real, the anger, like all those emotions come up. So I want to speak a little bit to taking care of yourself, because I think for so long I was like angry and pushing ahead for years earlier in my life, and now I'm like, you know what, I just can't. You can't maintain that. You have to sustain yourself. um, there's a book by Andrea Marie Brown, Emergent Strategy, that you probably can't see it through my thing, but I really think this is just a great read. I've read off and on over the years, and she even has a quote in there. I'll say it's on page 199. Everything we do is urgent. Like, this is such an urgent thing. We need to make change, right? But if and we feel like selfish if we're not like doing something, or at least some of us, often feel that way. But if we don't cultivate mindfulness and our attention to ourselves, we're never going to break that cycle. And we need to work on breaking the cycle. We can't think about solutions if we're so far in and so upset and emotional. So being okay, taking the time to be like, you can't fix everything. Like we all said here, finding those connections in those groups of people that you can work with is really critical. And I think, but also I think some of it is she has a couple principles in here, and some of the principles that she has in here I've gleaned on my own. Just 3 of them I'll list right now, and those principles are hold on, let me find them so I'm saying the right thing. Small is good, small is all. The large is a reflection of the small. So I want you to keep that in mind. Like, we want to do big things, but sometimes it's like thinking about fractals, and like the small, and it gets bigger and it gets larger, but they're all kind of the same on the same scale. The small impacts the large. So don't think what you're doing that's little isn't making a big difference later on. If we all do little, it sounds silly, but if we all do little things, it makes a change, right? So that's a big one. And focusing on the connections. It's not about, it's more than, I always keep going to the big picture. Oh my gosh, it's awful. But that's mainstream media. That's like the critical mass. Some of the loud voices that are out there about like that we concentrate on, like what, that 7-8% that are like, we don't believe in climate change is even real. Like, instead, like finding the small group, finding that resilience building relationships is really important. So move at the speed of trust, make those connections, and be like the water. I'll bring up the water again. It's just my theme today, I guess. Water is formless until you put it in a cup. If you put it in a teapot, it's a teapot, right? But it can also crash and burn, and all of that too. It ebbs and flows. It can cause hurricanes down in Louisiana. Maybe it wasn't that bad this time, but they've been bad before, right? So just kind of thinking about that. And a great book I'm going to put in the link for, that I encourage you all to take a read, to think about some of the way to take care of yourself and take heart. And if you don't know essays by Kathleen Dean Moore, she's a retired professor here that does a philosopher, and I've heard her speak before, and she's just amazing. But she wrote a book called Take Heart, Encouragement for Earth's Weary Lovers. And it's just a fabulous book. The art, the stories, I feel like it warms your heart, and it gives you this positivity to move forward. So find what you can to help yourself, and find your groups to help you keep going and keep doing the good work you're doing.
That is an excellent closing way to close. Thank you, Beth. That is absolutely a big part of what we are looking at here today. In the last slide of my presentation, there is a frameworks, and there's an interpersonal personal work framework section. It's critical to how you move forward, to make sure, like, because you're going to be working with people that are also full anxious and have a lot of concern and feel overwhelmed, and Adrienne Marie Brown will really help with regard to facilitation and working in groups and thinking through how to build those connections through storytelling. And that's community resilience in action right there for sure. So thank you all. I'm going to hand the baton over to Amanda. And I appreciate everyone's contributions here and your engagement. It's been really nice. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer, Beth, Rebecca, Corey. It's been really, exciting to hear from all of you and hear the work that you're working on. And thank you again for being so generous with your time. And if the concept of climate anxiety is something that brought you here today as well, I strongly recommend our session December 5th, being led by Steve Diggs. And that session is going to have 3 people who are really trained in climate science from a more scientific perspective. They work in data archives, they work in oceanography, and they found themselves in a world where archiving that climate data is both their way into dealing with anxieties over climate every day, but also finding a way out of it. And so I strongly recommend that session if that interests you. I did want to do one more plug for our survey. It is on the shared notes and the website, and I'm going to put it in the chat again. But we do really want to get a feel for who was attending today in particular, so that we can help to kind of guide our conversations, and particularly our small groups going forward, as well as the types of conferences where there might be interest in having meetups and conversations. I want to give us some time to think about what's next. Alice, if you've got the slides and can put up the what's next slide so people can get the date. Coming up next is going to be our first climate circle about this series, and talking specifically about session 1. It will have a space in order for everyone to think about what they heard today and to tell us a little bit more about climate circles, why you should attend and what they are. Lisa Spiro and Justin Wadland are here from the Climate Justice Working Group, and Lisa really kind of kicked us off on this whole project. So I wanted to make sure that she had some space to talk about it today.
Hi, everyone. Wow, thank you for a really incredible session. I think this was a wonderful way to kick off the series. So if you're like me, you probably have a lot of ideas and questions bouncing around in your head, and you may also be hungry for community and conversation and the opportunity to connect with other people who care about these issues. And in developing the idea for this series, we thought about the model put forward by All We Can Save, which is a wonderful collection of essays and poems and art by women about climate change. And I had a kind of transformative experience participating in circles, so small group conversations about the reading in that wonderful book. So we sort of adapted that idea in setting up circles, climate circles, to follow roughly 2 weeks after each of the thematic sessions. So our next circle, our first circle, will be on Friday, September 27th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And this initial one will be facilitated by me and my co-facilitator for the DLF Climate Justice Working Group, Justin Wadland. And we'll start with a quick summary of this session and then send folks into breakout rooms to talk about a core set of questions, which will prompt reflection and we hope ideas for action. So translating what you've heard into concrete action. And then we'll return to the larger group for some community conversation and reflection. We won't record these sessions, but we do plan to take notes in a common document. So we really hope to see you all at our climate circle. You don't have to have attended this session, although obviously you are here to participate in the circle. So encourage folks to sign up and hope to see you on September 27th.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate that. So yeah, make sure that you sign up. Each of our sessions and each of our climate circles are on separate registrations, just logistics of time and Zoom. But you can then register for whichever sessions you are interested in. Please visit the website. Thank you so much for your participation today in the notes. Lisa, I saw you kind of driving that today, and we have some really good, robust notes, so thank you. And if anyone has any questions in the meantime, there's a contact us button on the website, and we'd be happy to talk with you about ideas or thoughts on running this program. Thanks for joining us for this session, and we will see you all next time.
We did.